good? Hey, good morning, everyone. Eric Cobb. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect at Elastic. If you're not familiar with Elastic, we are a search, analytics, and AI platform. So give you the ability to bring in essentially any kind of data, right? Whether it's structured, unstructured, semi-structured data, make it searchable, and then make it actionable, right? And on top of that basic search and storage capability and analyzation capability, we also provide some out-of-the-box solutions for observability and security. So some of you may already be familiar with that if you're using Elastic. So there's a lot of other cool stuff that we're doing that's not necessarily pertinent to this discussion. So we've also sort of expanded a lot of our capabilities into the generative AI space, right? So taking advantage of generative AI and LLMs to help speed up or help improve efficiency for analysis and threat hunt and that kind of thing. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges with cyber operations in the multi-domain operations kind of space. And then I'll talk about how Elastic can kind of help solve some of those challenges or help improve those workflows. First, though, I think it's important to kind of level set on some definitions what I'm speaking to. Cyber operations, may mean different things to different people. But what I'm talking about is essentially any process, workflows, or capabilities that support securing a network, support making sure that analysts have what they need, right, to do their jobs. And that's anything from threat hunting, endpoint security, vulnerability management, and even compliance and auditing. Now, when we talk about multi-domain or cross-domain, I'm not talking about classified, unclassified, right, data between cross-domains. What I'm more focused on are the tactical, operational, and strategic domains, right? There could be more, but this is sort of what I'm talking about, right? Where you have tactical domain, where you have actual people, boots on the ground doing hunt activities. They're actually, looking at the raw data, looking at the things that are happening on the network. You have like an operational domain where you've got regional cyber centers who are essentially tasked with just making sure that the Army's networks are secure and operating smoothly. And then from a strategic perspective, this not necessarily has to be C5ISR, but as an example, where they're sort of chartered to make sure that they develop and provide capabilities that everyone needs, to do their jobs. So that's what I'm talking about when I refer to cyber operations and then multi-domain operations. So some of the main challenges with doing multi-domain operations, especially when we're talking about like tactical and operational domains, a lot of times those are in disrupted environments. A lot of times they're in air-gapped environments. They're in intermittent and low bandwidth environments. So there are inherent challenges with those kind of domains, especially when we're talking about large amounts of data. And also, there are situations where we have hybrid environments where we've got capabilities and things on-prem, whether they're in tactical kits or in a public or private cloud. And so what that really makes as a challenge is that it essentially silos data and capabilities, right? So if you've got an air-gapped network, you've got a disrupted network, or it's on you've got data you're collecting on a ship or on a vehicle. That data tends to be local to that environment, and then that causes problems because other units, other organizations might have use for that data, right? There may be a need to share that data, and it becomes really hard when you have these environments that essentially silo data and capabilities, and what that ultimately leads to is decisions at a strategic level being made in a vacuum without without being able to make informed decisions from data in other environments. So we'll talk about how we sort of solve this and how Elastic can help solve this challenge. So when we talk about siloed data and breaking down silos, what we're really talking about when we talk about breaking those down and sharing that data or making that data available, and I don't expect you to read all this. This is a busy slide, but essentially what we're talking about is a data mesh, right? Being able to allow the data to stay where it's collected, give the operators and the analysts local data to work with, but also making that shareable through a mesh for other organizations and units that need that. And so essentially the way that a data mesh accomplishes this is three primary ways, right? Connects all data sources and streams, gives you a unified layer, right, for governance and security policies, right? And then obviously one of the big value propositions for a data mesh is it removes the need to copy or duplicate data all over the place to make it usable for other business units. So with Elastic, how we support this notion of a data mesh is through a mechanism called cross-cluster search, which different from a federated search. If you're familiar with that terminology, this is more of a distributed search. So if you think about these domains, like we've got depicted here, we've got two operational domains, a tactical domain, and you see the key here is a cluster. Doesn't necessarily have to be the cluster here, but essentially these domains are collecting their own data. Their analysts and operators have access to their data to do whatever they need to do. But through cross-cluster search, you have the ability now to cross those domains and get an operational sort of holistic view of what's happening across your entire organization or across multiple domains. So from the strategic level here, as an example, whatever I'm doing, move to the next one. So let's say from a security perspective, I'm running machine learning jobs. I'm using generative AI to find anomalies or help me improve my workflows. I'm doing all of this at the strategic level, but I'm able to do it on data that lives in these multiple domains, right? So I'm actually able to issue a query, and by query, I mean a literal query, or we're building dashboards, or we're running detection rules, right? So we're doing security-related use cases or observability-related use cases. Because all of this data in Elastic is stored into a common schema, I now have the ability through the cross-cluster search mechanism to do that sort of multi-domain search, right? And so now I'm enabled to create a common operating picture without having to backhaul all that data. So the beauty of cross-cluster search, I issue a search or build a dashboard or whatever at the strategic level. I issue that query. I send that question to all of these domains, the operational and tactical domains, and then they do the work of processing and answering that question, answering that query, and sending it back. So not only are we don't have to backhaul data, we also don't have to copy an entire data set just to answer a question, right? So the beauty there is sort of twofold. Distributed processing of that query, getting the answer back, and then only getting the parts of the answer that we actually need or that we ask for. Security, when we're talking about security planning and security posture and things like that, disaster recovery and continuity of operations is a big deal, right? Being able to continue your operations if one site goes down. And we do have a capability called cross-cluster replication that gives you the ability to do that, right? So I can say, hey, from these three clusters, maybe I do need to copy the data, right? Or there's a primary site and a COOP site that I need to make sure are in lockstep. Cross-cluster replication allows you to do that behind the scenes. Elastic handles all of that. And again, when we're talking about being conscious of potentially low bandwidth networks, we're not copying entire data sets or entire indices. We're only copying the deltas from the last time that cross-cluster replication actually replicated that data over. So that's sort of the 30,000 foot view, right? But if we zoom in, you can get an idea of how cross-cluster search and kind of leads to a data mesh that crosses technological and domain boundaries, right? So from essentially, this can be any domain, right? We're collecting machine data, mission data. We're collecting real-time data, streaming data from Kafka, or we're collecting Postgres data, collecting system logs and metrics and that kind of thing. We're doing that at the individual domain level, but also allowing you to search that across domains. And so what that gives you the ability to do, again, like I said earlier, is keep data where it needs to live, or keep data where it's collected, or these data products are produced, and then make them searchable, visible, accessible through the data mesh. So from this top box in the middle, where we're talking about dashboards and visualizations, I sort of think about that as like a strategic level, right? We don't need to know all the fine-grained details. We don't need to see raw network or host logs. We just need to build visualizations, or we need to build some picture about what's happening on our network. So that's sort of from the strategic level, and then from an operator and tactical kind of level, being able to ingest that data, search it across clusters, and take advantage of the built-in solutions like Elastic Observability and Elastic Security that we have. Which, by the way, the Army is using Elastic Security quite a bit. And for those who aren't familiar, Elastic Security is our SIEM and endpoint protection capabilities. So gives you the ability to do all of this, right, across domains so the data can live where it needs to live, and through the mesh we make it shareable and accessible. And one of the previous slides I was talking about, the data mesh gives you that governance and security layer, right? So you can apply security rules so they apply across the entire mesh, right? So if I want one group to be able to see tactical information, I can do that through role-based and attribute access-based controls. And if I want another, operational group only to be able to see, data that we've transformed into something that we've distilled it down into something more useful, I can do that, and I can apply those policies and procedures at the actual data mesh layer. Then, if sort of to that point, right, that gives you the ability then to show the information that the groups need only to those groups, right? So, from a mission, or tactical level, maybe I am looking at system logs or whatever, and then we move up to sort of a higher level of abstraction, where we're talking about project planning or making sure that our units have what they need. The network's operating smoothly, so I sort of think about this middle layer. It's actually backwards from what I intended. I think about this more like the regional cyber centers, right? Their job is not to look at all the raw logs. Their job is to basically make sure that things are operating smoothly, and to do that without having to actually dig into data, and also not having to have that data copied locally. So, as a practical example, this is actually being used, if you're familiar with the continuous diagnostics and mitigation program within the federal government, run by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. What I've just described, cross-cluster search, is exactly the mechanism that they're using for this program. There's like 97 agencies that are collecting their own data. So if you look in this box here at the bottom, right, different data sources, right? And so like, scans, metrics, logs, that sort of thing, those are collected locally at the agency. The agencies have their own dashboard, like you see here, agency A, B, C, D, but through cross-cluster search, there's also a federated dashboard to the right that's essentially a roll-up of all that information, and none of the information that's collected at the agencies is actually copied all the way back to that federal dashboard. So through cross-cluster search, like I said, right, it's sort of a data mesh where they have visibility into all of the agency's data, so they can keep track of the security posture across the federal government. And from an Army perspective, I've mentioned the regional cyber centers a couple of times. If you're familiar with the term U-SIEM, that's essentially standardizing on Elastic Security for the SIEM across the Army. And it was first rolled out to the regional cyber centers, and the ultimate plan, which we've not gotten to this point yet, but it's to essentially do what you saw on the previous slide, right, where the regional cyber centers have the ability to communicate with each other through cross-cluster search, and we're not shipping data around and things like that. So to give that sort of common operating picture, that holistic view of what's happening across the Army. So I mentioned in the beginning that we're doing a lot of work in the artificial intelligence and Gen AI space, and rolling those capabilities into the out-of-the-box capabilities like observability and security. My colleague, Michael Young, is actually going to be speaking on this topic. He's going to talk a little bit about data mesh, probably a little more in-depth than what we talked about here, but he's also going to dive into the generative AI capabilities and things like that. And if you're interested in that, that's today at 2 p.m. In the CompTIA Estes B building, so upstairs and at the end of the hallway. Yeah, any questions? We're at booth 810, so if you have questions, stop me after this or come by the booth. We're happy to give you guys demos or answer any questions that you have, if there are no questions now. Okay.